It's now my pleasure to introduce Jonathan Wise. Jonathan is co-founder of Purpose Disruptors, which is a network of advertising insiders working together to reshape our industry to tackle climate change. Purpose Disruptors creates ripples to enable long-lasting and far-reaching change. And they do that through projects such as advertised emissions, calculating the greenhouse gas emissions advertising was responsible for in the UK in 2019. Good Life 2030, how can the advertising industry help reimagine a new good life? And the Change the Brief Alliance, bringing agencies and clients together to solve the climate crisis through all available channels. Before co-founding Purpose Disruptors, Jonathan was a senior research associate at the Better Buying Lab, run by the World Resources Institute, and an affiliate at the Forum for the Future, working with Sky and other brands on their sustainability strategies. And before that, he had roles at various advertising and media companies. Jonathan actually contributed to the first Mirrors and Movers report all the way back in 2013. So we're very, very pleased that he is joining us here to reflect on the progress we've made in the last 10 years and the task still ahead. We've asked Jonathan to give us his view on the role of advertising in a net zero world and the role of the internal sustainability team in all of this. Over to you, Jonathan.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. Had more hair then, less grey hair. Thanks very much. I'm in that sort of just before the break session. Can I just ask a question of those in the room? Just interested to know, like a show of hands, I've got like 4 options for you. How many work for a media channel or a platform that is like ad funded? So that would be kind of a newspaper, ITV, Channel 4, Google, Meta, whatever. Probably Sky and The Guardian as well, because they have subscription, but it's ad funded. So that's option 1. Option 2, so are you one of those people? Are you work for a media channel or platform that's not ad funded? So that would be a public service, like the BBC. Do you work, option 3, work for an agency that work with advertisers, so a media or creative agency or content or digital, or other, okay? Those, I think those might be the 4 options. So who's option 1, which is you work for a media channel that's ad funded? Okay, so that's about a quarter. Brilliant. Okay, how many of you are media channel or platform that's not ad funded, public service? Yeah, about the same, a few less. Okay, how many of you work for an agency, media or, yeah, okay, very few. And then other. Oh, interesting. What do the others do? Not that you're others, obviously. And you just want to shout out what you do? Sorry? Subscription. Subscription for what? Academic journal. Right, okay, cool. Anybody else? Yeah. Sorry? Auditor. Okay, cool, okay. Anyone more? Anybody else? A what, sorry? Video solution provider. A video solution provider. That sounds interesting. Cool, okay. So I'm going to just talk a bit about, for the people here that have got an interest in advertising and part of their content or their job is dependent on advertising revenue, this is going to sort of talk to you. Before I start, I'll give a little bit of history, just so you get a bit of context. So, as has been said, 10 years ago, actually, I just finished at Ashford. So I used to work in advertising, big advertising agency called JWT. So we worked on kind of Shell and Nestle and big kind of brands, get them to sell more stuff. I then moved, I worked in TV, so over there, BBC White City, Broadcast Centre, on UK TV and various BBC brands that helped the launch of Dave, which is a TV channel. And won an award for showing that the advertising and marketing we'd done for that had driven the growth of that channel in terms of numbers of viewers. I then did a master's program at Ashridge Business School, which changed my life. So that was kind of 2 years part-time. And then I've set up a couple of things, including Purpose Disruptors that I'm going to talk to you about now. I guess the thing I want to just share was an insight for me, which was very, very useful, was this kind of concept of I, we, planet. So as a consequence of doing those sort of activities, I realized that I was doing quite well. I had a nice job in London, and I was enjoying that. I was helping the we, so I was helping my clients grow. I was helping the agency grow. I was helping the economy grow. But on the master's program, I came to realize that basically advertising obviously drives consumption. And I came to realize that 60% of all greenhouse gas emissions are caused by household consumption. Okay, so my job is basically to get people to buy more stuff, and in getting people to buy more stuff, that drives emissions, which causes climate change. So whilst the I and the we were doing well, I was causing harm to the planet, and basically without any planet, there is no I or we. So the key insight was this. The better I did my job, the more damage I caused. And I would say that if anybody in the room, therefore, is in the business of helping advertisers grow, then that may well ring true. That's like logically consistent, okay? So there's a thing there about how do we come to accept that truth, I would say, and what do we do about that as sustainability professionals? That seems a pretty critical question that we might want to be asking ourselves. So, as I said, we do Purpose Disruptors, and so our kind of perspective is this. So can we help the advertising and marketing industry make the climate transition so it only promotes values, attitudes, and behaviors aligned with a more sustainable 1.5 degree world? If you say that, then it sounds like, why wouldn't we do that? Because that would be a beautiful thing for us to help contribute to. But where are we at the moment? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So that sounds like kind of logically coherent. Why wouldn't you want to participate in that? We've got 3 projects, as been said. So Change the Brief, education, advertising missions, which I'm going to talk about, and then Good Life, which is about kind of creativity. And that's run by myself and my 2 co-founders, Rob and Lisa. So let's just kind of take a step back. So like, what's the current relationship with advertising and climate change? So this is just a really simple chart that we produced. So basically on the horizontal, you have CO2 per capita in these developed markets. And on the vertical, you've got ad spend per capita, so how much advertising people see and living in those geographies. And so you see an almost perfect correlation. I know it's not causal, but an almost perfect correlation of 0.89. So there's a pretty obvious relationship that the more ads you see, the more ads that people witness and exposed to in the media they consume and the posters they see, the higher their carbon footprint. So more ads means worse climate change because people are buying more stuff. And then if you look in the UK, so this is a chart looking at the level of lifestyle or consumption-related emissions, and their descent is required for us to live kind of more sustainably. So it's quite a heavy chart. But if we look at the UK, which is here, Great Britain, so we see at the moment the footprint is 8.5, and basically it needs to go down by 70% by 2030, and by, I think it's 92% by 2050. Okay, so this is across leisure and services, goods, food, transport, housing, basically everything you use in your house. So just to be clear, at the moment, we are making it categorically worse by getting people to buy more stuff, and we need to completely turn the ship around in order to get to a sustainable future that we can be proud of contributing to. So that's quite dramatic, I would say. For an industry, that's an existential issue. And just to put that into context, this is a chart we made from our world in data. So we plotted this from 1945, which is the birth of consumerism post-Second World War, when all the factories were running and humming because of feeding the war machine, the sort of origination of the good life in the States, which has basically been exported globally. You can plot on here kind of globalization, opening up of tiger market, tiger economies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is basically the growth in emissions globally from 45 to 2022, the top of the line. Clearly, it's ascending because every action that we've chosen to take or not taken in terms of reducing our carbon emissions has failed to date. And this is the shape of the descent in emissions should we choose in order to keep temperatures below 1.5. The thing to notice here is the shape of the line. So this is a pretty steady ascent in terms of the growth of emissions, but the descent is a factor, a complete different shape. It's almost a vertical line. So to my mind, that is a absolutely different society. Right? You are not going to get, if this is all about buying more, your good life is through the accumulation of stuff, through ad-funded programs. This is going to be something completely different. You cannot descend that line by telling people they need to do less, right? If I was not who I was, I'd be starting a religion to try and convert people from understanding that the meaning in their life comes from having more stuff to something completely different, perhaps connection with the natural world at a deeply felt level. But that's another conversation for the pub. But I'm just trying to contextualize this like the way we've been going on can no longer continue should we choose to make the changes that we need. And that will therefore require fundamental and radical change at all levels of society, which is what the IPCC said back in 2018. So the question is, are the efforts that you're making in around sustainability radical and far-reaching and unprecedented? Because if they're not, we might not hit that line. So it's a really beautiful creative opportunity to reimagine the business, to reimagine society, so we descend that at the trajectory is required. So, into that context, we kind of like, how can we help? How can we help? So we came up with this idea of advertised emissions. So this is basically a borrow, from the finance industry. So the finance industry, you're HSBC or Deutsche Bank or whomever, and you have to worry about the carbon footprint of your offices and business travel and the servers and all that kind of stuff. That's insignificant in terms of your footprint compared to where you choose to invest, right? So if you invest in that coal-fired power station in Poland or wherever, then the emissions as the financial institution, they're on you, right? The running of that, building and running that coal-fired power station, if you're HSBC, if you invest in it, it's on you. This is quite a radical idea, but it's been adopted. Mark Carney's promoted it, the ex-bank governor of the Bank of England, and BlackRock, who you will have heard of, hopefully, the largest investment company in the world, they've worked out that their financed emissions, when they look across their portfolio, are 330 million tonnes, which is twice the size of the UK domestic emissions. So one company, its financed emissions, because it invests so much money in fossil fuel companies to build things, is twice the size of the UK. It's an extraordinary figure. So the question is, can we do the same thing for advertising? Can the advertising industry take responsibility, not for the investment it puts into the world, but for the content that it puts into the world and the consumption that that creates? That seems quite an interesting and logical kind of possibility for the industry to take responsibility for. So just to be clear, at the moment, this for the geeks in the room, we call this advertised emissions, so the upstream emissions of making the ads, running an agency, going to shoots, etc., placing the ads, so a digital out-of-home screen or putting it on the internet, there's a carbon footprint associated with that. That is advertising. That's the internal operational issues currently within scope 1, 2, and 3. We're talking about this, the downstream emissions of the product being made and being in use and being disposed. So if the advertising gets you to buy one more iPhone, then that iPhone would not have been made without the advertising creating that incremental sales. So the building of that iPhone, drilling in the Congo, making it in Foxconn or wherever in China, and then throwing it away and ending up in the dump in Nigeria, then that is all on the advertising agency, right? Because without your brilliant work, that wouldn't have been sold. That's the argument. You celebrate the growth, you have to take responsibility for the emissions associated with that growth. So for those of you in the UK who are aware of a thing called AdNet Zero, which is a big kind of program from the advertising industry, they are talking just about advertising's emissions. So this is all about raise awareness of climate change, take responsibility for those direct emissions on the left-hand side, and measure and reduce those, we're saying the next logical step in responsibility, sorry, it's dropped out, but it's basically what I've just said, raise awareness of the link between the work and consumption, take responsibility for that, and take some action to reduce it. So you're then kind of going, well, that's all great, but give me a number. What does that mean? So let's work out how you would work out what advertised emissions are. So this is based on the financed emissions calculation broadly. You work it out by multiplying ad spend, how much are you spending on advertising, the return on investment, how successful has that advertising been in terms of driving the incremental sales, which you can calculate through econometrics, and then what's the carbon footprint of the stuff that you're selling, i.e., if it's a plant-based burger, it's going to be a lot less than if it's a Big Mac, obviously, and that gets you to that number. We work with the econometrics agency, Magic Numbers in the UK, so to work out the UK numbers with some really established sources. The geeks will have heard of those. And then this is what we worked out. So in 2019, advertising, the entire portfolio of advertising in the UK, all the ads that you might see and that are paid for, it contributed 186 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent, which basically equates to advertising adding an extra 28% to the carbon footprint of every single person in the country, which is quite a large figure. But if you speak to people who work in advertising, they go, you know what, that's about right. If we're really good at our jobs, which we should be because we get paid a lot of money, then our job is to drive growth, which drives emissions, which causes climate change. So whilst a hard figure to read, that is reality. So then the question is, well, what are you going to do about it? So we're talking about like the system. So this applies to brands, agencies, the media owners, some of whom are in the room, the regulators and the government. Because if you're going to take responsibility, you need to get that number down, okay? And this is our suggestion, and this is kind of where it's going to come into media owners land, our suggestion of how you might want to do that. So you could, if you wanted, categorize the brands that advertise that you have on your platforms that you work for if you work for an agency into 3. The red brands are those companies, those organizations that have got zero chance of achieving a 50% reduction in emissions as a consequence of their business model. So that would clearly be fossil fuel companies, airlines, long-haul flight destinations, holiday companies, if they're involved with flight. There's no way you're going to get a sustainable airline that's 50% reduced emissions by 2030. That's just a physical impossibility. The amber is where advertising can be absolutely amazing. So this is about shifting cultural norms and behaviors away from red meat into plant-based, away from petrol cars into EVs. This is where a lot of spend is going, and it's really wonderful that advertising can kind of popularize and socialize new norms of behavior in terms of maybe new circular business models, etc. And the green brands are kind of going to take care of themselves because they'll be getting investment from various VCs and things to grow. The challenge is this. So this is the 186 figure that I've just mentioned. If you do nothing as an industry, then you basically you're basically heading to 273. So you basically take the growth in the market, which will occur, and the bounce back after COVID has actually been stronger than that. And what's needed, if the industry were to take full responsibility and choose to reduce its advertised emissions by 50%, it needs to hit the 93. Do nothing, it makes it worse. Do something, you get to save the world. So what are you going to do? So the question is, this is an existential question for the advertising industry because the industry, like many others, always says yes to everything. Whereas, of course, if you're going to take this seriously, you might need to consider saying no to some things. Have we got the capacity and the maturity to have a conversation about the future that you want and how that relates to our current business model and revenue? I haven't seen that yet. What's great is that we've got some fantastic leaders that have stepped forward to be part of a working group that we've kind of formulated to work out the methodology. This is a really heavy lift from a kind of analytics and data point of view, but the brands you can see, the media owners you can see, the agencies you can see have all put a senior person on the working group to kind of work out how they can calculate the advertised emissions for their organization, which is absolutely wonderful. You can see there's a space for a TV company there, some people in the room. If anybody is interested in joining and having this conversation, then please let me know. This has been running for about 6 months, but we've got funding to do it certainly into the whole of next year. And we've got a roadmap. We're speaking. This isn't like a crazy idea. This has been adopted as a leadership criteria within the Race to Zero. So that covers 50% of global GDP. They've identified advertised emissions as a leadership criteria within the extended Scope 3 definition for the geeks. So this is kind of come down the track. There's a GHG protocol review of Scope 3. So if advertised emissions gets included within that, then this becomes mandatory. So what does this mean for media companies? Let's put that in the room. So think about that chart and what that might mean. So back to, you've got red, amber, green. So the green is fantastic, right? Sky Footprint Fund, absolutely brilliant, free airtime for wonderful companies making a difference. The amber, again, this is Hellman's ad-funded program on Channel 4 in the UK, where you have Prue from Bake Off kind of talking about how you can use your food waste using Hellman's mayonnaise. So you're transitioning a Unilever brand down the amber by getting people to save carbon by using less food. But what about the red? So what if you take ad money from a red, whether it's a fossil fuel company, an airline, or a long-haul flight destination? What are you going to do about that? Seems like a reasonable question if you were going to choose to reduce your advertising emissions. But more importantly than that, I think there's this opportunity to see the whole picture. Okay, if you know that the advertising on your channel is driving the footprint of your customers, your viewers, your audiences by 28% if you're in the UK, then what happens? So if you're ITV and you're showing, you know, Emmerdale use of an electric vehicle, that's absolutely fantastic. If you then cut from that program into an ad for McDonald's Big Tasty, haven't you just done all of that work? All of that time to speak to the commissioning team, the editor, all of those people getting in the car to the set, all that kind of stuff, all the heavy lift of doing that, and you suddenly cut into an ad for a Big Mac or a Big Tasty. See the whole picture. Similarly, Bake Off in the UK, Vegan Week, come out of that program, come into an advert for Tourism New Zealand. 3 million, 4 million people have just seen that ad. Again, come out of eBay's partnership with Love Island. Brilliant, absolutely fantastic piece of work. Recalibrating the relationship with clothes away from fast fashion. You then go into an ad for Expedia featuring Ewan McGregor. Do you see, it's like if we just focus on the content as being the thing that we consider as sustainability professionals, and we choose not to look at the whole experience that consumers have, are we doing a disservice to our profession? Again, the sun. Here we go, Green Week. Cut to next page, ad for EasyJet. And controversially, Netflix. Okay? Fantastic content. Kiss the Ground, one of my favorite documentaries, Don't Look Up, etc. They've just announced that they're going to have an ad, they're going to be ad funded in part. Come out of Don't Look Up, go into a McDonald's ad. These are the questions I think that we need to be considering, okay? So this is my suggestion. I very, very, very rarely advocate anything, but I'm going to today because I'm going to. So I totally, mirrors or movers, media content moves society, and certainly the ad-funded component moves people to buy more stuff. 28% figure demonstrates that. The vast majority of media organizations, in my understanding, are funded by advertising. The primary goal of advertising, in my experience, is to drive unsustainable consumption. You must have to include the advertised emissions of your platform when considering your net zero targets or you're thinking about influencing consumer behavior. So if you're Sky, you're Channel 4, you're ITV, you're The Guardian, you're Google, you're Meta, whomever, Amazon, that's in your influence, and therefore you need to take responsibility for it, just in the same way that the finance industry is taking responsibility for theirs. You have influence over who you take on your platform. Many people will say they don't have the ability to have influence. We just do it because our clients tell us. Everybody has a choice. That's a fundamental part of being in a democratic society. You have a choice of who you choose to work on or who you choose not to work on. And ultimately, I would say you have to reduce the advertised emissions of the advertising you carry if you are committed to becoming a more sustainable or net zero company. So this is to the point of like, what is the role of sustainability professionals? That is incredibly, incredibly difficult to make happen, but isn't that the opportunity to recalibrate our understanding of how content operates to deliver that sharp down curve? And are we here to pacify, or are we here to ask challenging questions and hold space for a conversation about the future that we want and how our business can thrive in that future possibility, rather than just maintaining the status quo that has been so destructive? So this is a question I always ask, but given we're in a climate emergency, what is the most that we can do so our children, nephews and nieces have a beautiful planet to live on? Not what is the most sustainable thing we can do for our organisation tomorrow? Two completely different questions. There you go. That's it.
Thank you, Jonathan. Lots of food for thought there. And I already see some hands going up in the room, but I'm going to take chair's privilege and ask the first question.
Sure.
Because I really like the RAG model, right? Give green brand space, help amber brands transition, go away from red brands. But in reality, have we got the definitions down to really know what is a green product, what is an amber product, what is a red product?
Yeah, forgot to say something important. So we were invited by the UNFCCC to present this in the Blue Zone at COP last year. So as in, the UNFCCC, which is not a fast-moving organisation, have identified that this is an idea, is the idea that's needed. It's the only advertising space that was given. So this is interesting enough to be given that, which is a real honour. That was first cut in the RAG. So what within the working group that I mentioned, we've identified 6 questions that we're developing that will help media owners and agencies in particular decide what are red, amber, green. So, off the top of my head. One is like carbon intensity, so revenue divided by footprint, and of course that has some dodgy data because not all companies reveal their full extent of their scope 3. Are they on science-based targets, and where are they on that? One is about, are they actually taking any action? So does the reality match the rhetoric? The fourth question is, are they being hypocritical? So this is very common. So there's lots of positive stuff, organizations saying they're doing great stuff, and then they go and fund climate lobbyists to basically lobby the government not to act against climate change. There's lots of work, some fantastic work done by Influence Map on that. The fifth question is basically, does the CapEx that they're investing, is that reflected in the ad spend? Again, classic greenwashing, particularly some industries. And then the sixth one, which is the most challenging, is does this brand and does this work contribute to the level of consumption descent that's required, which is the 70%. So if you look at the UK, for example, we currently eat 80 kilograms of meat every year. And if you look at the data, I think we need to get that down to about 10. So if you're basically in a business, if the business model is driving red meat and you're choosing not to descend sales of red meat, then you're a red. Unless the business starts taking decisive action to stop doing damaging things like selling red meat, actively doing that. You can sell as many plant burgers as you want, but if you're not selling less red meat, you're going to be a red because you're not descending for various reasons. So yeah, we're working that up, and we're using kind of really objective database sources. So we're not using XR or Greenpeace or WWF, as lovely as they are. There's something about the activist voice that I think discounts them because their opinion's too subjective, and we're just trying to be super objective.
Okay, so you've got the metrics. Following up from that, is there enough green or amber ad revenue out there? Or is a fundamental problem that, if we're saying, we can't have content funded by ads that are driving consumption, we need to move to a different business model completely?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, so we're not, so I'm being super punchy today. So I see this as a management tool. The first place this would be used is basically in a pitch situation or when a new advertiser comes to you. Basically, should or shouldn't we take this organization? That's the easiest conversation to have because you don't have the revenue at that moment. So it's harder to review your existing client base. So I think first of all, it's to open a conversation, and what we found is it's really powerful because this is new. A lot of this is new news for people to consider. So advertised emissions is actually a way to have the conversation that you don't want to have. And because it's objective, I think that's really useful. I don't think there's the spend. There isn't the spend in the green, clearly not. There's a lot of work. I think the rump of the spend is actually in the amber. Mm-hmm. I think actually the red, I think it's seasonal because holiday companies, advertise in particular seasons. But my conclusion, sorry, it's a very long answer to the question. Where I've got to on this is, so Bernard Looney, bizarrely, is the CEO of BP. And I think he's put it really well in terms of defining the nature of the problem. So he said that them as an oil and gas company, they went through the process of basically working out how they can shift to a more sustainable future. And they said that they needed to decouple the skills from the outcome. Okay, so the outcome at the moment is drilling fossil fuel hydrocarbons out of the ground. The skills that they have that are brilliant are basically really skillful, world-class at project management in hostile environments. His point being that if you can drill a mile deep in the Gulf of Mexico to get oil out, you can put offshore wind in the North Sea. The challenge that media companies and agencies have is they need to go through the same process. This is the brief, and maybe consultancy companies as well. How do you move from an outcome which at the moment is driving consumerism? What are the transferable skills, and how do you detach yourself from the outcome of driving to consumerism to something that's in service of life? If BP can do it as a process of an intellectual process, then I would hope that the highly paid advertising executives and management consultants can do the same thing. But that's the scale of the shift. It's about, again, back to creating meaning from being about driving consumption to something other, whatever that happens to be.
Thanks. All right, so I saw there was a few questions in the room. Lady in the middle here on the right.
Hi, Daniel. Thanks. You nicked most of my questions, but I had loads. That was such a brilliant presentation. You've absolutely hit the nail on the head.
Thank you.
Yes, that's definitely what we should do. I'm wondering how confident you are it's what companies will do, and whether, so the kinds of things that sometimes work in terms of procurement is if you've got a standard or a certification, or you have to report that as part of your social and environmental reporting. Is there anything sort of in the pipeline to sort of create that kind of stamp of approval when it's like, hey, you can get your advertised emissions, green tick, that can really help motivate? Because otherwise they're just giving up a lot of ad revenue, aren't they?
Yeah.
Must be a hard sell.
It's a very, I think there's a question under the question. So,
yeah.
so to answer is we haven't got a plan of doing like a certification or a stamp. That's a really good idea, and it's a really heavy lift to work this stuff out. We know how hard it is to supply data to GHG protocol and all that kind of stuff. So that will come, I'm sure. I think, sorry if I'm paraphrasing, but the question under the question is like, how do you create change? And so I come from the advertising space, but I think this does apply for media owners as well. If you were for example, to have a company that there was a very high spender that was committed to net zero. So let's take Unilever or Procter & Gamble. Wouldn't it be interesting if those companies that were spending a lot of money with an advertising agency or on a media platform were to say to those media agencies, those agencies or media platforms that are currently taking spend from red, you are not committed to climate change because you are giving space and working with and allowing people to see adverts which are promoting unsustainable lifestyles. You have to make a choice as to whether or not you want to take our revenue and the positive benefits of that, and from a PR point of view and a HR point of view, or we will take our money away if you can, and we'll go find plenty of other people to work with if you continue to work with them. So if you follow the money, then I think it's the brands have the power to influence the media owners and the agencies to be able to make a shift. What I don't like about that argument is it's a parent-child relationship. I think what's really interesting and what I would have, is like, do we as professionals in these organizations have the agency and the moral fortitude to have the conversations that aren't we want to have, rather than simply waiting for the people with the money to tell us what to do? It's a travesty of humanity if we have to wait for the latter.
There's a question in the back of the room there.
Hello, thank you. It was just on, you know how you mentioned 60% of greenhouse gas is due to consumption?
Yeah.
How do you feel about Web3 NFTs? Like, do you think it's a bit of a catch-22?
I'm old.
Well, I guess because you know how with NFTs you can buy things or own things digitally.
Yeah.
I guess that helps to an extent with consumption, but then you've got the electricity consumption on top of that. So I didn't know whether.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes. I mean, that's just to my mind, that's a distraction. It's like carbon offsets. It's a distraction. I don't think you're still going to have a fridge. You're still going to have a car. You're still going to have to eat 2,000 calories a day. You're still going to need to heat your home. You're still going to need all these physical objects, all of which, and if you're in those spaces, you're still going to be hit with loads of advertising. So I think that that also plays into the answer is more, right? The internet will save us, technology will save us, the new thing is the answer. I think this is a philosophical debate about who do we want to be as humans, and how do we, like the Rumi quote, you know, yesterday I was going to change the world and today I'm going to be wise and change. Sorry, yesterday I was clever and wanted to change the world. Today I'm wise and I'm going to change myself. The level of conversation here is about who do I want to be, and have I got the capacity to change who I am and what I do in my role to change the world, rather than assuming that some new tech is going to be the answer, because it never is.
And I guess that points to the steep decrease in consumption that you mentioned.
Yeah.
We're going to have to consume these things, so actually we need advertising. Maybe we can't solve the problem without advertisers, but they need to use their power to get us to consume the right things, not just consume more.
But yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you read John Alexander, I mean, it's a brilliant book called Citizens. He talks about just completely changing the frame of our experience from being seen as people who are sold to, and the answer is buying, to seeing ourselves as participants in our society and shaping it through being citizens. And COVID was a wonderful window in that new possibility. So the answer isn't advertising, or more advertising, or just advertising. I'm grasping for the opportunity for us to be more, and for us to step into something greater than waiting for business to solve it. So I'm not being very articulate.
John Alexander says we need to move from being consumers to being citizens.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
It's
a
away
brilliant
from
book.
being
Yeah.
consumers. Question in the back of the room, Hannah.
Hello. Hi, I'm Hannah from BBC Studios. Love seeing Cook Clever, Waste Less in there. We're really proud of some of our team's kind of coming up with those ideas, and then also it's so great when commissioners go for them because there's lots of ideas and not always get commissioned. It's a really interesting conversation, and I think you might have seen this week that British cycling has just been sponsored by Shell. It's like a constantly kind of, my echo chamber is constantly outraged by things, but there are kind of things which is still exciting, well, interesting to see that they happen in 2022. I understand that kind of what you're talking about here is the emissions from the adverts being out in market, but I wondered if you have a point of view on measuring the impact of making the advert in the way that we measure the impact of making our TV shows. So, you know, how advertisers and agencies produce the advert and the emissions that are created there. Do you have a point of view on that, or?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, so Albert and then AdGreen that fell out of that. So those are the tools that people use to be able to measure, you know, did you fly to the shoot? What was the catering like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That is all really important. And yet it's small, in my opinion, compared to what I'm talking about here. So the question is, yes, it is important for everybody to get their house in order. The challenge is, if that's the center of gravity of the conversation, and many forces would wish it to remain that way, then that is doing ourselves and humanity a disservice in disallowing us to look at the bigger picture. So if it's 28%, I would say, I don't know what it is for advertising production, I would say. So if it's 186 million tonnes for the consequence of the consumption, I guess the production in the UK is like, what, 2 or 3 million tonnes? It's a dramatically small factor. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A couple of questions from, I know there's more in the room, but a couple of questions online. So Matthias asks, how can we make sure that we are not putting ads in contexts that don't match with what we believe in? So kind of the flip side of the question. Kind of the conscious advertising.
Sorry, can you just say that?
How can we make sure that we are not putting our ads in contexts that don't stand with what we believe in?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's this. It's like, how do you have the conversation? How do you decide how you decide? I feel like what's interesting about this work is that it activates a new conversation about like choices, difficult choices, challenging choices, morality. Like, who do we want to be? What do we want to be in service to? What do I want to be responsible for putting into the world? So how do you have a conversation in the organization? Is the question, exactly that question, ask that question to the organization and see what the response is. How do you decide and debate what is, what isn't, what is right, what is wrong? I think that there's so much grey, like the leadership opportunity is helping attempt to gain clarity in the grey. Mm. Yeah.
And talking about leadership, another question online from Emily from The Economist. She says, Mark Carney has been very instrumental in driving awareness and action for financed emissions. Who might do that for advertised emissions?
That's a great question. I do not know the answer to that. There is no one coming forward at an industry level that I have seen. There are some people who are leading in their agencies and their companies, which are fantastic, but there's no one yet who has the firepower and the star power of Mark Carney. However, it was very interesting this week. There's a guy called Philip Kotler. When I studied marketing, he wrote the textbook of marketing. So he's called the father of modern marketing. He has just recently read Jason Hickel's new book, Less is More, which is an extraordinary read about degrowth, which is, we can have a debate about that as a word. Kotler's read that book and he's basically come out and said, I believe there should be restrictions on advertising and limits on marketing because of the climate emergency. So for an establishment figure to do a volte-face and become from a promoter to a kind of saying there should be more, to a defender of there should be less, is a really powerful moment from a sort of systems change point of view. Mm-hmm. It's no longer XR, it's Philip Kotler, right? It's amazing. It's really amazing. So if he wants to come forward and write the forward for our new report, then he's more than welcome.
Well, yeah. Philip, if you're listening, then that's a call out. If not, there's an open vacancy, it sounds like. More questions in the room? The lady in the middle here.
Oh, sorry. If the person from The Economist can get me in touch with Mark Carney for him to write the forward, then that would be or quote. That would be really grateful. Thank you.
Great presentation, thank you. I'm really interested in the stick piece. You flashed a slide quite quickly around when you were hoping to get advertising emissions into the GHG protocol and aligned with the SBTi. Have you got a timeline for it?
No. We know that. So for the geeks in the room, so GHGP are doing a review next year and looking at extending Scope 3 boundaries. They are aware of advertised emissions as part of that. There are many factors that may see its inclusion, clearly because the UN, the last IPCC report, for the first time identified demand-side emissions as something that need to be addressed. And if 28% of those demand-side emissions are drawn through advertising, then that would seem a pretty obvious place to look in terms of adding some weight to the GHGP redefinition. And then obviously it needs to be included within the GHG protocol before it then gets adopted by science-based targets. But the fact it's been adopted by Race to Zero as a leadership practice is a good early signal that this is being taken seriously by the establishment.
And are you able to put in a nudge for another big bugbear of mine, which is that there isn't a similar thing for the consultancy and auditing world?
Again, this is, and I talked to Kernstone, and Deloitte, when we wrote the introduction to the report, we said we were grateful to the finance industry for doing it first. We picked up the baton as the advertising industry and are doing it next, and we invite the management consultants and the lawyers and other professional services to take it on from us. This is coming down the track, whether you like it or they like it or not. So yeah, I'm staying in my lane. But yeah, absolutely, if management consultants need to get on this. As a whole, I can tell you there's a long story about that down the pub. But anyway.
Right, consulted emissions, we'll take that
Consulted emissions, I know there's somebody looking at lawyered emissions. Yeah, absolutely.
Another question there, Blaine?
So I have tons of them, but I'm going to limit to one. What about the audience? You're talking about how the brands have the power to, influence the medias for selecting them if they are a green brand, to prioritize them, right?
Yeah.
What about the audience? I mean, if you explain to me as a non-consumer that suddenly maybe I could prioritize watching a certain channel, or I could prioritize watching a certain media service because I know that there is an activity around, making more green brands as part of the advertising strategy. Would that not be even a faster acceleration? I mean, if you address your consumer needs, you're likely to come out as a successful business, right? And people do care for that topic. So is there another way to actually engage the audience with that matter? I mean, I don't know.
It's a really, really interesting question. So this is going to be quite a punchy answer. Consumers do what they're told. Okay, that's the success of advertising and brands, right? There are no 7 signs of aging. You don't need to take serum, conditioner, shampoo and other products into you don't need these things. But consumers have been trained, and that's the right word, to believe that that is what is important and willing to pay for it. So I think that the power lies with the messenger, not the receiver. And so that's why this is why we're movers. We're not mirrors, we're movers. And so we are kind of like gods in terms of how we choose to define what people believe to be important, and they will do what they're told. And that's the ROI model. It's very successful. It's driven globalization. And so so you can ask 6 billion people what they think, but I'd rather speak to the 20 media companies and advertising groups that dominate the perceptual space of those 6 billion people.
Okay, and I agree with you. So it just needs one disruptor, right? We just need one that's going to train the consumer, right, to see things differently?
No, it's going to take one disruptor from one of those organizations to decide to only promote brands and behaviors that are in line with the 1.5 degree world.
Yeah.
And by doing that, advertising and media it's like in the language, it's like a systemic amplifier. What goes into its projection space gets projected out into society. At the moment, that's consumption is the answer. When one person changes, and Gabby's stuff this morning was brilliant because it talks about the success of making positive changes in terms of audience numbers. It's like when one person moves and they're successful, everyone else will follow. The answer lies in the power makers, not the receivers of what the power makers tell them to do. Really critical difference. The answer doesn't lie with consumers. We are the power, and with that power we have a tremendous responsibility which we are choosing not to own.
Right, well, 10 years on, the question's been answered. We're not mirrors, we're movers. Thanks, Jonathan. Should have had you here 10 years ago and wouldn't have had to do all these conferences. I think we maybe have time for one more question. Here to the front. Yeah.
Thank you. I was wondering, there's obviously a difference between the image of an advertisement and the brand that's behind it.
Yeah.
Does the image of an advertisement affect if a company is red or, amber? For example, if McDonald's promotes a vegan burger, does that change if it's red or amber?
Yeah, it's really good question. That's the thing we've really got stuck into. So if you look at McDonald's, then let's take that as an example. So you would say that McDonald's selling a plant-based burger and they've launched them in all the stores here in the UK, then is that fine? If you look at McDonald's business, then if you look at their scope 1 and scope 2, 3 emissions, so scope 1 and 2 have gone down dramatically. The restaurants, renewable energy, cooking oil, blah, 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 it's gone down. It's absolutely fantastic. That represents, I think, something like 1% of their emissions. 98% are in the burgers, and they're getting dramatically worse because they're selling more red meat, because that's their business model. So in my mind, and this is, again, challenging, that makes plant advertising greenwashing because they are not willing to they're choosing not to sell less red meat burgers. So anything, if they change, then the McPlant is definitely an amber. But because they choose not to do that, they maintain as a red. And these are the conversations that need to happen. It's the rhetoric and the reality and looking into the data. What's good about McDonald's, actually, that's publicly available, so that at least they're transparent, which is great. Yeah, so I think that's answered. So you always have to look at that. It's a really good question between what the company is doing and what the advertising is saying, and is there a break in reality there? Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much, Jonathan.
Pleasure. Thank you.